Hello, this is Rose Diamond from Tribe in Transition, and this is the second video in a series that I'm making exploring the psycho-spiritual and cultural transitions that can be sparked by a collective outer events such as the coronavirus pandemic and lockdown. And I'm going to be speaking from my own experience, not because I believe I know the truth or what is true for you, but because as I speak from my experience, either you will resonate with me or you will be able to see more clearly your own experience in a way that's different from mine, or maybe a bit of both. So what I'm doing is inviting you into an inquiry with me, and I would love to hear from you your responses to what I'm saying. So when I talk about psycho-spiritual transition, I mean that those inner transitions, those inner journeys that move us from being the human aspect of ourselves, which is dominated by the egoic mind and old conditioning, towards an alignment with soul, the spiritual being. So I'm coming from a place of understanding that we are spiritual beings here to have a human experience, and to infuse that human experience with our spiritual being, with our soul essence. And that soul essence is always available. That is who we are. But many of us at this time are going through a process of reconnecting more strongly, more clearly, in a more stable way with our soul essence. And events such as the coronavirus pandemic, a disruptive event which has actually disrupted the people all over the world, could be the prelude to a collective awakening of consciousness. Because there is no transformation without disruption. That is what transformation is. Transformation is a disruption of our comfort zone. It's a disruption of what has been our reality so far, so that we open to a new, more expanded perspective and experience of reality. So we can't have transformation without disruption. But when disruption occurs in our lives, we tend to resist it. We tend to be frightened of it. We tend to, because, the human side of us wants to be in control, wants to know what's going on, wants to think that we are the ones that are in control. And I think that's one of the awakening aspects of the last 6 months. It's 6 months almost exactly since we went into lockdown in the UK. And one of the effects of that 6 months is it's just been showing us, if we've been awake enough to hear and be aware, that we human beings are not in control. And in lots of ways, we need to get more in control, because otherwise we're hurtling on a suicidal mission here on Earth. That's how serious this is. And I think a lot of people are now actually coming out of the woodwork and saying that, whereas before it was no, everything's fine. Everything is not fine on one level. And yet on another level, everything is perfectly fine. And that was one of the insights that came to me through this as well. To understand both of those, everything is fine and everything is not fine. And there's something that we need. So there's nothing that we need to do, and yet there are things that we can do. But I'll come to that stage later. What I want to talk about now is the first stage, which is the disruption and the resistance to that disruption, the fear of that disruption. So for me personally, when the lockdown was announced, I felt extremely suspicious, alarmed, in fact, by the speed at which we were, our civil liberties were taken away from us. So we basically moved very quickly into a situation where we had an authoritarian government telling us what we could and couldn't do. So all those civil liberties which we had been used to exercising and taken for granted suddenly, even to the point where people were not able to visit their own families. So that to me was alarming. It set off all sorts of alarm bells. what does this signify in terms of going forward? So I went into alarm, suspicion, almost went into sort of catastrophic fantasies about it, but didn't quite. And that phase lasted for me about a week. And then I realized that resistance was futile, that this was what was happening, this is reality, that I needed to conform to these rules, and there was no getting away from it, and that no matter what I might think was going on politically, this was the reality that was being offered to me. And what I've learned over the years is that it's absolutely pointless to fight with reality. It's absolutely pointless to fight with what's going on. And that the quickest way through is to surrender to that, to let go, to surrender resistance. So I had a previous experience in 2011, the end of 2011, living in New Zealand when we had a torrential rain, and me and my friend Maggie were caught in a landslide, which damaged our house. And at that time, I had an immediate response to what was happening, which was to align with my higher self, to align with soul. I chose spontaneously and immediately to use that experience as an opportunity for growth and to do whatever I needed to do. So in this coronavirus situation, it took me a little bit longer to get there. So the disruption happens. We tend to react to that. We react rather than respond. We react to that from a place of fear, resistance, and fear usually is to do with a feeling of not being in control, of being helpless. In this case, of course, that was overlaid also with a fear of death, fear of getting sick, fear of loved ones getting sick, fear of being separated from loved ones. All of this happened very fast, so it was like a sudden death, very much like a death. And for those of us who have been on a spiritual path for many years, those skills that we've developed through spiritual practice can be now brought into play in these kind of disruptive, potentially transformative situations. So spiritual practice isn't about sitting on a cushion being peaceful. Well, part of it is, being peaceful, being blissed out, being fully connected with our essence and with the essence and with all that is beautiful. But there's also a very practical aspect to our spiritual practice, which is when we are face to face, when we are challenged in this way with a disruptive event, a life-changing event, a globally life-changing event, that we can bring into play what we have developed, the skills and the strength and resilience that we've developed in ourselves through spiritual practice. So it's very useful to continue with the spiritual practice throughout the times of peace, so that when we need them, when we need those skills, they're available, they're part of who we are. And what I realized when I reflected on this first stage was everybody was having a very different reaction to going into lockdown. And it seemed to me that there were three basic human needs that were being threatened. One was our need for safety, our need to be well, our need to not die, to stay alive, our need for safety. The second was a need for freedom. And the third was our need for truth. And different people would have been more aligned with one, two, or three of those. And so what I noticed, particularly on social media, was that it was actually quite difficult to express very much at that time. Because, if I started talking about what's going on politically and other people were concerned about people dying, there was an immediate dissonance there, conflict of interest there, people, wanting to shut other people down. So in that very first period of alarm and resistance, emotions tend to be very volatile. because there's a sense of insecurity is being experienced, helplessness, out of controlness. So one of the key skills when we're feeling like this is to get grounded. It's first of all to recognize, okay, I am experiencing fear, and to get grounded, literally feet on the ground, bringing the awareness into the breath, letting the energy of fear flow through and out with the breath, filling the inner space with the light, the energy that's coming in with the breath, emptying out the fear, consciously choosing to be whole, to be in our wholeness. We're always whole. This is this very simple practice. And again, the more we have been doing our spiritual practice over the months and years, the more easily we can draw on these simple tools when we need them. I mean, a lot of people, when they're in fear, tend to feel ashamed that they shouldn't be feeling afraid. We should always be strong, have it together, be the one who knows. And suddenly to find that we're in a situation where we have no control, where we don't know, where we're vulnerable, it's very difficult for a lot of people to accept. And so that's where the resistance comes. I don't want anybody to see that I'm afraid. So first step, acknowledge, I'm afraid. Second step, get grounded, get your feet on the ground, go out in nature, breathe, be under the big sky, go lean against a tree. Fill yourself with life-giving energy. Come into yourself. So that's all I want to say today. I'm just talking about that first stage of disruption and resistance, and how we can take these little baby steps to bring ourselves through that period of fear and back into alignment with our whole selves. So I'll see you again tomorrow. Thanks for listening.